Welcome to the Trusted Advisor podcast, where you get a deep dive into the world of financial planning with industry leaders who share their stories of winning and learning as they charted their path to success. This podcast is for the curious, those of you that like to dig into the detail. If that sounds like you, get ready to listen and learn.
Welcome to the Trusted Advisor. In today's episode, we're joined by Pat Gardner from Collins SBA, a financial planner turned tech lead who's been at the forefront of transformative technology in financial planning and accounting. Pat has not only spearheaded Collins SBA's journey with a customised Salesforce CRM, but also hosts the AdviceTech podcast on the Ensombl platform, making him the perfect guest to discuss all things tech. Throughout this conversation, we dive deep into Pat's innovative approach to integrating best-of-breed systems, from automating workflows with Workato and Salesforce Flow to creating seamless client billing with Stripe and Xero. Pat explains how he's used AI-driven tools like Fireflies and OpenAI to enhance client interactions, streamline operations, and improve team efficiency. He also shares the ups and downs of managing change, especially when introducing new technology to a multidisciplinary team. Today's episode is packed with insights on using technology to simplify processes, reduce costs, and deliver an exceptional client experience. We'll hear about Pat's unique journey, his vision for future tech trends in financial planning, and how forward-thinking firms can leverage these tools to unlock new capabilities. Whether you're a financial planner, business owner, or simply interested in the evolving role of tech in our industry, this episode will give you a fresh perspective on what's possible. So get ready for an inspiring discussion on the future of financial planning and tech innovation with Pat Gardner. Welcome, Pat. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Rob. I'm very excited to be here. And first time, cameo as a guest. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, great to have you, Pat. I am an avid listener of your work on the AdviceTech podcast, so I don't think there's anyone better placed to answer the questions I've got lined up for you today. So again, appreciate you taking the time to have a chat. So we've known each other for a little while now, and we were so impressed with what you've done at Collins SBA. We've been in fairly regular contact just to sort of keep tabs and see what we can learn from the developments that you've undertaken at Collins SBA, which is so impressive, and certainly have excited some of our internal people who are focusing their efforts on our own tech stack. But perhaps if we can begin, Pat, could you start by sharing what initially sparked your interest in taking on the task of building the tech stack at Collins SBA after making the move? Well, you were a financial planner at the time. So what was it that sort of sparked your interest to jump across into the tech space?
Thanks, Rob. I always had an interest in tech in general, also known as sort of shiny object syndrome. But when I was still like an associate advisor, so this would have been 6 or 7 years ago, I came across within the Microsoft suite, Power Automate, so Microsoft Flow and Power Apps and all that sort of thing. And that was literally just, you've got those sort of 9 dots when you go into Office Home and it's like, I've got all these apps. And then one day it just appeared and I just got curious and started having a go. And it really is it's just basic sort of visual automation, so no code, where you're just going, if this happens, then do this, and this, etc. And at the time we were using Midwinter, so we had gone self-licensed. This was before my time, away from Xplan onto Midwinter or AdviceOS, which was pretty popular and up and coming at the time. And they just, I don't know, the financial planning CRMs are just really bad at workflow. It's all like really task oriented and it's not automated. It's not speaking to, or at least back then, it's not speaking to other tools. And I was just like, well, why don't we sort of reimagine the SOA request process? So as an associate, you're getting those requests and they're coming through half baked. And it just wasn't a great process. So it was like, let's use a flow and use the tools in the Microsoft suite. So use Planner to automate sort of task creation and the form and all that sort of thing, and just make sure we can make it more efficient. And then so we're doing that, and then maybe sort of 6 or 12 months after that, we started going down the CRM pathway. So we're an accounting, financial planning and business coaching firm, but we didn't have a CRM. Like as I mentioned, we had AdviceOS or Midwinter, so that was just financial planning. So just for financial planning clients. Accounting, they still use Xero Practice Manager. They were using some sort of custom-built workflow tool that another team member had built, who's then gone on to build their own accounting software totally separate to that. and business coaching, always just business coaching, doing their own thing, PowerPoints, Word, all that sort of stuff. And we just did not have a CRM. Like, you'd have 3 business divisions, and the only thing that's really sort of making us look like one business was the facade of the building. Like, you go in, it's just the silos, etc. So went down the CRM pathway, had an external independent consultant come in and recommend HubSpot, basically. And it was an objective recommendation. We're about to go down the HubSpot pathway, and then Creative Mass came along. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the story of Creative Mass, but I believe it came out of the Macquarie Van network, and they were going to build the term was the future of financial services delivered today, and they were essentially just going to rebuild Xplan in a better way, but on the Salesforce platform, which, to be honest, still makes sense in terms of picking a best-of-breed platform, a blank canvas, and then building off that. So we were the first client or customer of Creative Mass with their Wealth Connect product. And that was just like, wow, this is this Power Automate system on steroids. Like, it literally, I didn't know that tech like that existed in terms of the enterprise world, in terms of automation and the blank canvas sort of things. And immediately I was just like, wow, this is something we need to get behind. You know, you go down the sort of welcome trailblazers sort of pathway where you've got all the conferences and all the shining lights in the capital cities and all that sort of thing. And I remember coming back from one of those as we were still in the thinking phase about, you know, do we go down this path? And it was just like, we literally have to do this. Like, there are so many businesses of such a high caliber on the platforms. You've got all your big 4 banks, or probably the big 6, big 8, or just most financial institutions are on the Salesforce platform, or at least have that in the tech stack. And it was just a no-brainer in terms of, if we're going to come together as a business, we need to use the right tools. Little did we know that the Wealth Connect product hadn't been built yet. So being client number 1, that was really the social proof and the capital that they needed to actually build the thing. So yeah, a lot of what we saw was through what's called Adobe Illustrator. So they were just like mock-ups of screens of what Salesforce looked like or was going to look like from the point of view of their sort of reimagined financial planning CRM.
I'd have been pleased to get you guys.
Oh, exactly. And then, yeah, so we just went down that pathway of essentially building it with them for probably the first 6 to 12 months. And then what sort of came out of that was we realized we had really poor data, and that's what happens when you've got 17 sources of truth in terms of you don't have one way of doing things in a business for multiple divisions. You have clients that are clients of multiple divisions. So, you know, the accounting client, financial planning client, business coaching client, but there's just all these separate systems of record. So how do you pick the source of truth? So that was one issue there. The other issue was that they complicated the heck out of it from day one. They went custom code, and it just fell apart and was never, it just never worked as it was originally intended. I think they also understandably lost focus on us as they wanted to move on to bigger and better things. So we, as I said, we were that first client that enabled them to get that social proof to move on to bigger businesses. And COVID happened as well. So we had this sort of great sort of working relationship where they would come down and we'd all be doing it in person. And then COVID sort of changed that. So working through that. And then, I was a financial advisor at the time. And once again, having a play around inside Salesforce, and worked out they had the same or similar sort of tool to Microsoft in terms of the Power Automate style platform, where they have this visual tool called Salesforce Flow. And in that tool, you can literally do anything. And so what we did was, whilst Wealth Connect or Creative Mass were building, the future of financial services delivered by the end of next week for other firms, it was just me and a colleague doing workarounds. We were just building things that were solving for our problems and releasing them within sort of hours or days. Just building really simple things, like it might be like a contact request form or this bit of automation that's in the background and no one sees it, but it sort of surprises and delights you on the other side because you haven't had to fill in 17 fields or create new records, etc. And that just kept building and building in terms of our own abilities, in terms of internally on, like, Salesforce is incredibly Googleable. As I mentioned, you've got the biggest businesses in the world that are using it, which means that everyone's got issues and they've Googled it before, and there's lots of forums, and they've got a great training platform in Trailhead. So we just skilled up, and like as problems came along, like, can we solve it within Salesforce? And really just brought all of the problems that Creative Mass weren't solving and just started honing in on those, to the point where it got to a stage where they had totally butchered the accounting workflow side of things. It was once again very custom. It wasn't fit for purpose in terms of accountants don't like tasks. I don't know if anyone likes tasks, but accountants work on jobs changing hands, not if this happens, then do this task and repeat 17 times. It's like the threadification of Xplan in terms of everyone's got this hangover of this is how workflow is done. And so they were having a real hard time over in accounting. And to be honest, Wealth Connect was never meant to be an accounting product, but it was sort of like, oh, you're client number one, you're not happy, let's try and solve this problem as well. But no, that got butchered. And it was just like, well, it got to a point where there was almost a mutiny in accounting. Like we had 2 team members actually get up and leave the business because they were coming to work and not knowing where things were at or what they had to do for the day, and just using this, this enterprise CRM, but absolutely hating it and just questioning everything really, to the point where 2 team members left. And it was like, well, okay, we've got a bit of a crisis here. And it was like, okay, Pat, do you want to have a go at this and try and see if we can, apply those same learnings that you and your colleague have been doing from the perspective of simple solutions? Are there integrations that we can pop in there and just reimagine this? And so that was the first sort of main win I think we had in terms of bringing back that trajectory of our CRM journey. And it was just fixing accounting workflow. And it just all flowed on from there to the point where it was like, okay, you've clearly demonstrated that it's possible without Wealth Connect, without Creative Mass. What else can we do and how can we go from there? And then in terms of now, like financial planning also use that same workflow rails or workflow system. So you now have the full business on the same architecture. And then that then links to proposals and all sorts of other things. But that was really where it all started. And then it was like, okay, you've clearly got a keen interest in this. I obviously didn't have, I didn't have a full client base at the time in terms of financial planning clients. So that transition was as easy as it could be. So I had about 60 or 70 clients. And it was really just about making a decision on the future. And it just really got me going a lot more than sort of cups of tea and, no change ROAs. So, and a lot of the things about that too is technology is far less regulated. There's just the freedom to build things and have that direct impact. I don't know if it's a bit of a control freak about it, but it's a lot easier to control your own destiny in the tech side of things than it is to talk about, fingers crossed markets will recover, just wait sort of thing. So it's probably just my personality, but that's how it sort of came to be. And then it's been about 2.5, 3 years since we exited that relationship with Creative Mass or Wealth Connect, and they've since had their own problems and been sold off. And I think there's a private investigator looking for the original founder still. Don't know where he is. But, having a good time on our own and choosing our own destiny.
It's quite a story. I mean, you actually, as you say, there was a lot of excitement early there and you got to see what's possible. And obviously that really lit a fire under you to see what you could do directly. Even before things started to go south, you were getting in there and trying to improve things and make things better for your business as they were trying to build their product and sell it to other potential Collins SBAs out there that were looking for a solution. People think financial planners are very quant driven and we're numbers people, but obviously you've got a bit of creativity there, Pat, as well. And you could see the creative flair pop out and thinking, how do I actually now utilize what I've seen and turn this into something that actually can work for us? So you obviously grabbed it with both hands and it became almost a necessity by the sound of it. That in some respects, things had gone so far south, you'd lost team members there and you thought, I've really got to, and obviously the team supported you to say, Pat, help us here if you can really take a hold of this and try and get us through what was a pretty tricky situation. And obviously you just ran with it and started making some really transformative changes to what was at the time, sounds like it was in a bit of a struggle street. So I guess, Salesforce, as you say, is such a world-leading CRM and so many businesses are using it. As you say, it's very Googleable. You can see a lot of what's possible. Being so highly customizable, can you walk us through some of those first major changes or customizations that you implemented that right back in the early days, I mean, you mentioned a contact form. What are the things what were the first early wins that you were able to go, is it flows, whatever it was, saying, I reckon we can do this and I reckon we can make a real difference with our own efforts here? What were some of those early wins that you got?
Yeah, I touched on it before around the workflow side of things. And I've soon sort of realized that when you are rolling out a new piece of tech, using Salesforce or Enterprise CRM as an example, you actually have to start with workflow. Otherwise, you don't have many reasons for team members to be in that system. Like, there's no way that you can go live with a CRM and then everything's turned on and working from day one. But you need team members in there for a reason, and so workflow was key there. I mentioned before, like around the accounting team coming on the workflow side of things, like that was an absolute game changer for us. But the other thing too with that was workflow then became tied to engagements, in terms of you would have a client sign on to a proposal, and then that's your press go for your workflow then beginning. So that was a massive change in the business. On client has agreed to something, we're then going to deliver on it, not we're going to do this and fingers crossed the clients will then pay for it on the other side. So we had that there, and then introducing that to financial planning along the same sort of mindset as well. And the whole point with workflow as well has been, because you've got different sort of templates in terms of the stages that workflow goes through, the different types of jobs. We call them jobs, but it's really just a workflow. I can embed all of the 17 other things you need to do within that workflow as well. So a team member can not only be in Salesforce using their workflow, but they can, without actually leaving that job, they can get their job done as well. So that has been some of the first major stuff that we've done on the workflow side. We're a self-licensed business in the financial planning side of things, and I mentioned we've got accounting as well. So a big focus as well as part of that initial stages was just getting rid of the reliance on spreadsheets. And that's actually is all what a CRM is. Like, it's just a spreadsheet that looks nice, but it's also relational and with controls in place as well. So what we're able to do is actually build our own AFSL compliance manager. It's a separate app within Salesforce, but it's all embedded as well. So all of our controls are in there. You've got team members assigned to those controls, so they're reviewing them based on the cadence that's required. So whether it's monthly or quarterly, 6 monthly, annually, etc. Also, all of your policies are in there too. But it's then also the software register as well. So all the software that we use, making sure that adheres to the Australian privacy principles, and even things like using it as the CRM for, who's your BDM at this institution or this place or this tech? How much are we paying for that tech? What currency do we pay for that tech in? All that sort of stuff. So that became a separate beast of its own, and that was peak side of the desk stuff. In terms of what I mean by that is when I was still an advisor, but also doing the tech stuff on the side, because we would have monthly AFSL compliance meetings, a full sort of compliance overhaul, and it was really about mapping all of our compliance controls to the obligations that we have as an AFSL, and also all of your registers as well. So one of the other reasons why having compliance in your CRM is a great thing too is team members don't need to get out of their flow of work to report a breach or report an incident. So I've just made it really easy for team members they're in a job, they might notice something has happened, they can easily log that incident without having to leave their flow of work. And that was totally separate from the mandate of Creative Master Wealth Connect anyway, so that wasn't even part of the original scope. I think SharePoint as well was probably one of the... Oh, sorry, Rob.
I was just going to say there, so this is this compliance manager software you kind of created, embedded in Salesforce, so it was native in Salesforce and allowed people to make notes of issues that surfaced through their workflow. So they didn't have to sort of step out and try and record it somewhere else, but it was all embedded in there. So is that software that Salesforce have as one of the service offers? I mean, I know they've got a whole range of different offerings, or did you just, using flows, just build that as a native flow inside your CRM?
Yeah, it's totally custom. So where Flows comes in is the user interface. So you control what users see and they do and what happens in the background. So that could be like scheduled automation. So, every night at midnight, this happens. Or it could be a screen, like you mentioned, that contact form example before. Or it could be a combination of things. So Flow is just like how you make it look nice but also functional. But in terms of the AFSL compliance manager, that's just totally custom through, custom objects. So you're creating, it's a bit like a tab in a spreadsheet. Creating another tab in a spreadsheet that's controls, another tab for obligations, but then linking that all together through the relational nature of a CRM. Yeah, exactly. So totally custom, but peak side of the desk stuff, but not overly complicated either.
So you got to, I guess, begin to see what was possible. And so you really just started to build things you could see could be done because you understood the objects, you understood the capabilities of the CRM and thought, well, we could do this, and this now that I know what's possible. It's going back to the first principles, isn't it? You're not just seeing what's out of the box and someone showing an object. You're seeing first principles. I know what this does. I know how it works. Therefore, it should be able to apply in these other scenarios. So can you remember some of you talked about there the bringing together of the accounting and financial planning. For immediately, that's a massive win, isn't it? A business that's multidisciplinary is running off different systems. You're trying to operate like one business, but it's just a facade so that made you one. But you were at the forefront of bringing that together as a true one business with one source of truth and overcoming all of those sort of disparate system issues. So can you remember some of the challenges beyond that most immediate one that you actually were facing when you were trying to integrate Salesforce with other systems or tools that you used in the business? And how did you overcome sort of those integration issues potentially with Salesforce now as the hub? What other potential challenges were there around other pieces of software that you had?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of challenges, but I think the main problem is that it's Salesforce, but then it's Salesforce plus. Like a lot of businesses are led to believe that this thing works out of the box from day one, and you've got all these bits of functionality that you just would assume would be there, either included in the license costs that you're paying for, sometimes annually in advance or quarterly if you're lucky. But it's actually the blank canvas anxiety of we've got this tool that's been thrust upon us where, yes, it's called Financial Services Cloud. That's the cloud that we use, but it's incredibly Americanized. And I don't think Salesforce have had the penetration, if you want to call it that, from a, FSC in the Australian market that they have wanted. And that actually, opened up the opportunity for businesses like Creative Mass or WealthKit to come in and to configure that for those businesses and build the Australian version of it. So there's that side of things where you just go, wow, like we're now spending, a truckload on this enterprise CRM, but now I've got to spend money on this and this and this and this. And it all adds up. A great example is, document generation. You'd think that that'd be quite simple, but no, you've got Conga, which has had this 20 plus year stranglehold on Salesforce. I don't know how. It's probably because lots of big businesses use it, insurance companies and banks to generate letters that they're still mailing out to clients. And it just the change management of ripping that out and putting something else in is just not worth it. So somehow the business still exists. But you're using late 1990s sort of PDF, Microsoft Word merging tech and paying for it as well. So it's just like everyone needs a license for this sort of thing, this additional thing. Marketing doesn't come out of the box either. Like you've got things like campaigns and emails and stuff, but you need to get an external marketing tool. And yes, there's implementations or integrations rather, but you got to pick the right one. So you're making all these decisions on a daily basis on what are we going to add to the stack and does it actually integrate? That's the other thing. Not all integrations are made equal. When you've got, Salesforce, it's enterprise tech, a lot of the integrations are built with the mindset that it's just a business that's selling to other businesses. And the actual structure of how clients and accounts and all that sort of thing is set up is actually, it's based on companies, and then companies have their VP and then they've got their decision makers and all that sort of thing. And that doesn't suit, financial planning firms or, accounting firms or just firms like you and I. So there's that sort of challenge of, geez, we've got to customize this stuff that, you would have thought would be quite basic. And that's where you start to appreciate those sort of financial planning style CRMs because they are built in that way. I think one of the main challenges though is a lot of people say that like if you're building your own CRM, so yes, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, but it's the same thing as living in a house that's also being renovated at the same time. So you've got this perpetual change management where team members are coming to work the next day and this minor thing might have changed because maybe I've done that and gone, wow, everyone's going to love this. And then instead they go, like, what the heck has changed? Like, it might be so minor, but it's just ruined my muscle memory of this is how I did this yesterday. So it's just this perpetual challenge of keeping everyone motivated to say, we're doing this for these three reasons. And this is why we've made that change. So it's managing the change is actually harder and takes longer than building the customized functionality. So that is probably one of the biggest challenges.
That's a great insight. As you say there, just to pause for a second there, I just want to dig into that because as you say there, you've just shared something which I think people would initially be quite surprised by, that you said the integrations themselves, once you get into it, you actually can do a lot, but you actually have to kind of bring the team with you and not sort of inflict it on them so fast that they get change fatigue and start to wonder what it's all for. And so that's a really key insight, isn't it? That to think that, yes, the technology is available, it can do amazing things, but you've got to try to make sure you bring your team with you at a pace they can cope with. And even internally, our own business, we've experienced that where we ask about at our quarterly board meeting of our executive team, what's working, what's not working. And one of the things that one of the directors says, I can't keep up with the technology change and we're not going as fast as you, Pat. So it is very much the pace of change is challenging, isn't it? Because we who are trying to make things better for everyone need to acknowledge that people have got day jobs and they're actually trying to accommodate those changes into their workflow and just say make new muscle memory from the old ways of doing things. So it's a really good insight that you've shared.
I'm totally with you, and I think I was just going to say that it's way easier, and this is why it was probably easier in the early stages. It's way easier to roll out new functionality because you haven't had a previous way of doing that, like just new things. Whereas when you're changing existing process and existing integrations, etc., that is where it really hurts, at least in the short term, and then you really do see it on the other side. But you mentioned, the question was around specific challenges. We also had the challenge of around integrations where you might have Salesforce have this app exchange where you can jump on there and install or download integrations essentially, or configurations or customizations, etc. But a lot of them don't do, they might do 6 out of the 10 things you want them to do, to the point where sometimes it's not worth actually getting it because you're spending money on it and it's actually not solving your problems. And so what we ended up doing, this is probably about 2.5 years ago now, is it was, now, Pat, you're leading the tech strategy and the Salesforce side of things and trying to do it on sort of config instead of code. And we got to a point where the mantra was, and still is, to try and, keep it as simple as possible, but where possible, where we need to integrate, try and find an off-the-shelf solution. And then if not, try and build and plug that gap either through custom configuration or development, etc. So we went down this path of actually employing a contractor through India. So a Salesforce developer whose core focus was integrations and doing them in basically where we couldn't do that in a retail way. So I've mentioned before about the Power Automate platform and Salesforce Flow, etc. It was really just, when we need to extend that capability, can we get this resource, this person to actually build that side of things and do the funky stuff in, say, Xero, for example. And that was great at the time because he was doing some incredible work on integrations that were highly custom and highly configured to what we needed. But all we were doing is we were just creating tech debt because I don't know how to code. And he was building, he's using Salesforce Apex, which is the coding language that Salesforce uses. And so if anything happened with that without him there or moving forward as a business, we would need to essentially put out to tender or go and find a Salesforce developer to look at this monstrosity that's been built, understand what we've got there. redo it, etc. And it wasn't scalable in terms of keeping up with as you mentioned, just the sheer pace of change. So that was not a long-term strategy. And so what we were able to do is at the same time that same person was also leaving that organization, we were able to stumble across Workato. So I encourage you to listen to, you mentioned the AdviceTech podcast. That was my first episode as host. And I know you were about to whip out the credit card, Rob, to actually purchase Workato after hearing it. But Workato has absolutely changed the game for us. And it's given me absolute superpowers when it comes to integrating other tools, extending those integrations, and then being able to just orchestrate processes and just get things done. So Workato has really brought everything together from a tech stack perspective, where we've been able to integrate those tools that maybe aren't available on the App Exchange, but then take them even further through sort of custom API stuff as well. So yeah, without Workato and without Salesforce Flow, we would be nothing. Like, that is literally how our Salesforce instance has been built on, and it runs on Workato and Salesforce Flow.
You're right. I did listen to that episode and I did get excited about the possibilities of Workato. And obviously you are further down the journey than us. We're not using native Salesforce FSC the way you are, and we're using Practify, as you know. But I did think this sounds like a pretty amazing piece of software, and clearly it is a very useful piece of software for your business and what you've been able to do with Salesforce. So you started us off there with saying, flows inside Salesforce, Workato, on the laundry list of integrations that you've then got. Let's sort of run through them. What other things have you got there that are plugged into Salesforce by way of integration that Workato has helped you achieve? And perhaps in walking through the laundry list of integrations, just one at a time, help us understand what they do and what benefit they bring to your business.
Sure. No, there's more than 10. I think there's 12 or 13. I'll pick the most significant ones because some of them are sort of microservices, if you want to call them that. But I think Stripe is probably one of the most important and critical integrations that we've implemented. And in terms of some context of how we've come to using Stripe through Workato, is we were using a tool that was previously called Practice Ignition. It's now just called Ignition. And I mentioned as well, we've got multiple business divisions. But the thing with Practice Ignition is you can only have one instance per entity. And if you've got, you might have a nominees entity, but those sort of sub-entities, which are the business divisions, still need to get paid separately because it just represents the engagement of that client. And so we need to have multiple instances of Practice Ignition. And so that by itself does not support a integrated firm. When you've got separate proposal systems, the same freaking tool, but clients being sent proposals from accounting or from financial planning. And so Stripe has been a game changer for us because it enabled me to actually turn what's called Salesforce opportunities into a proposal itself. So if you think about opportunities, it's really just like a deals object. If you use something like HubSpot, it's just a way for classic sort of sales object where advisors or sales teams are tracking their deals. Where are they in terms of their pipeline? How much is the deal? What are we selling them, etc. Traditionally, even businesses like Salesforce will use opportunities and they'll send you your DocuSign to sign your contract off the back of it, sort of thing. But what we did was we were able to, with Stripe, actually just put that sort of checkout screen on the end of the proposal. So clients are getting a proposal, which is really they're just viewing a flow. They're viewing a flow, which is a nice looking version of their client-friendly version of their opportunity. They're viewing the scope of that proposal, the billing schedule, etc. That's all custom that we've built. Then they get to this checkout screen and they can literally Apple Pay their proposal if they've got an iPhone, or Google Pay it with their Android device. And that is them actually checking out of a Stripe checkout session. And that then kicks off your workflow that I mentioned before. So all your jobs and all your billings taken care of. And that then folds into Zero Blue. So invoicing. So all the invoices are created for that proposal, all through automation, all through Workato. So what that means is in accounting in particular, you're engaging clients for the financial year. But because we all care about cash flow, we don't want to be, charging them one big lump sum on acceptance. But we also don't want to be doing a do and charge where we're doing that work in August and then charging them for the work that we've done and saying, pretty please, can you pay this invoice in January? So what we do is you have the accountants that will do their proposals. A lot of them are done in sort of May, June, some in July, August for that financial year. Here's the scope of work. Here's when we're going to do it. And so they accept it, and it creates all those zero invoices, all reflected in Salesforce. So I go into that opportunity and I can see exactly what the client has paid and what's coming. So not only does that, from a micro point of view, is that great because I can see what's coming up, but it actually means we can accurately forecast to the cent what our revenue is going to be because we've got all that zero data inside Salesforce, and then we can report on this advisor's, their target for the financial year, but also the business from the point of view of how we're tracking as a division, as a business, as a site, etc. So there's that. We've also got, in terms of the last couple of weeks, was able to rip out DocuSign and put in Anature. So Anature is Australia's leading e-signature provider, and they also do what's called ID verifications. That is done through Stripe in their backend. But you have all the same sort of features and benefits of DocuSign when it comes to legal agreements. But you also have, more importantly, platforms bloody accept them. There are so many e-signature providers out there that actually don't accept your sort of second or third tier e-signature providers. And so what we've been able to do is, like, DocuSign has a Salesforce integration, but once again, it's custom. You can't really configure it to what you want, and it costs an absolute truckload. So we've actually been able to save about 80% on e-signature expenses. And if you think about the pricing model, you're paying per envelope. So it's pay as you go. It's not DocuSign where you put your finger in the air and go, how many envelopes am I going to send for the next 12 months? And if you get to that, 1,000 or 1,500 and you start to go over it, they will, if you don't go through with an early renewal, they'll start to sting you with overage charges. And I don't agree with that business model. But anyway, we've been able to...
Which of the platforms are you using that Anature is acceptable to? Because we have experienced the same issue where we're all very keen to use electronic signatures, and DocuSign's the one that seems to be most accepted but most expensive. We have it natively available to us in Box, which is enterprise level document storage, and Box Sign is a feature there, but it's not widely accepted, which is a bit of a pain. So Anature, your experience is that's well accepted by the platforms, and which ones are you using?
In particular, the top sort of three would be NetWealth, Macquarie, which is a big one, and BT Panorama. So they're probably the main ones there, but they also are accepted by industry funds as well. So if you've got like an Australian super account or Australian retirement trust, etc., they just have done it in a way where they've got the same security framework and the same, I guess, audit trail. I think a lot of what the providers care about is a quality certificate, where it's got that audit trail of here's where they signed, the IP address and the controls there. So, we've just been really fortunate that Anature has got the same sort of security and the same level of acceptance, but I've then been able to build our own integration through Salesforce. So that is huge for us. And it has led to, it's one of the examples of change where team members, it's actually a similar experience when you're, configuring your envelope, etc. But it's more so the change of how do I create that envelope? And now it's like, well, starting from today, everyone, you can do this in a job or in a workflow. Whereas before, a lot of them were doing it through DocuSign directly, just sort of things like that. So that's really powerful and infinitely scalable as well. Like I really love business models where you actually pay for how much you use, so it's scaling with you and you're not actually having that guess of how much am I going to send.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Totally. Zero Practice Manager or Zero Green, that's another one through Ocado that we've been able to use and extend, particularly for the accounting team. So accounting are using XPM on a daily basis to sort of manage and lodge tax returns, but also activity statements and all that sort of thing. And that's really beneficial from a Salesforce point of view is you've got that data, like you're just entering it once. So if you create an account in Salesforce or an account comes in through automation into Salesforce, that is created in XPM by default. So you don't have to do that twice or manually. Thinking about sort of meetings and transcriptions, and if you've listened to the podcast, you probably notice that there's 17 AI note-taking apps out there. Like everyone's building their own AI note-taking app.
I have noticed.
It's crazy. And I think it must be because
crazy, hasn't it?
It has. And I think it's definitely due to the fact that because AI is so good at extracting information from text and from, like, it's really good at transcribing in general, you can really build what you want pretty quickly. What we've landed on for now is we were previously using Otter AI, and it got to a stage with them where, like, if they had a robust and, you know, well-working Salesforce integration, would totally still use them. But it got to a point where I had to pretend to be a new customer to actually get a response from their support team. And it was just like, this is not sustainable. And we're using, you know, this is pretty sensitive information that we're putting through here in terms of client conversations. And so essentially found the equivalent, similar price, but with an open API architecture that I can hook into called Fireflies. So Fireflies AI. And that means that advisors and team members, it might not even be an advice-related meeting. It might be a team meeting or, say, a compliance meeting where you can just transcribe that meeting, but then that'll automatically create that file note in Salesforce with all the AI action items and all that sort of thing. That means you can – it's really a micro-efficiency if you don't have someone having to go, I've just done this in Fireflies or Otter, go into Salesforce, create my file note, you know, copy the content over. Like, it's just a micro-efficiency copy and paste exercise that we've alleviated there. But it also means that –
jump in there. Can you build the necessary training in Fireflies so that it knows what sort of file note you want, and you're not limited by – because we're using Otter, we are trying to work with the right prompt to get the best possible file note version out. Do you find that having used both Fireflies and embedded it in Salesforce as you have, you can teach it and it's automatically built in that sort of into your workflow, the prompt that gets that file note the way you want it?
Yeah, in the back end you can in Fireflies, so you can essentially tell it what to look out for, etc., and have different types of meetings as well. I think the problem, and this is also probably why I've got 17 financial planning specific AI note-taking apps coming to the forefront, is a lot of those apps like Otter and even Fireflies are just built for general note-taking. So out of the box, they're not really designed for those financial planning specific appointments that you're having. But yeah, you can customize in the back end in terms of the prompts and the things to look out for. To be honest, I'm looking and watching the progress very heavily of Claris AI. So Stuart Riddle and the team there. That is probably one of the better financial planning specific AI note-taking apps that I've seen. And it's also just a really nice user interface. And I'm really excited to hopefully one day to be able to use the tech of that. So the back end of something like a Claris, and then have the Salesforce as the front end where you can actually go into a meeting with your Salesforce app. If it's, you know, an in-person meeting, for example, that's another challenge, is most of these apps like Otter and Fireflies are built for virtual meetings, whereas we all know we've got hybrid situations where you might have sometimes you might not even have everyone in the same location. You might have a couple of people online, but also, you know, client partner might be online, client in the meeting itself. So that's what I'm looking at from the perspective of moving forward. But that has been also really critical because it means that advisors don't need to, because, you know, a CRM should be where, you know, the system of record where everything has happened and transpired. So if you're taking away the risk that an advisor could leave a recording inside Fireflies or the said transcription app, if it's not there, then it didn't happen. So you need to make sure it's coming into the CRM so it benefits everyone. So you don't have sort of selfish behaviour, which is not obviously on purpose, but you need your team to know what happened in that meeting too. It's not just all about the advisor going, you know, yes, I've done my file note. You need that to come through into the CRM.
Pat, how do you think about the recording and retention of those records? Are you retaining the transcripts on the client file as well as the file note that flows from that? Because one of the things we know about AI is it loves information, and the more information you can teach, you can keep and teach it on, the more effective it becomes. Have you thought that issue through as to what you want to do with the transcriptions, and do you store them in full as well as a summary against the client file?
At the moment, in terms of what's on the front end, it's just the AI summary in terms of the, you know, all the action items and the discussion points and all the questions, all that sort of thing. You've got a link straight to the actual Fireflies interface. But to answer your question around transcript, absolutely yes. So through automation and through Workato, we're actually grabbing that transcript as a file, creating a file from that transcript and popping that into SharePoint to be used at a later date. That's the other good thing about Fireflies is because you've got that API, we can essentially extract that data as the transcript happens. So if we find that better tool, Claris as an example, it's not going to be this massive exercise of, probably with Fireflies pretend to be a new client to say, hey, can we have our data, please? So there's that element of it, but that streamlines or segues really nicely into the next best-of-breed integration being OpenAI. So OpenAI, obviously, they're behind ChatGPT, but they've got all that same capability and ability through API. So that means that immediately overnight, you can hook up your data source and start having conversations with it or using that data to get what you need. So it means that we can actually use OpenAI, so through their API to, as you're sort of alluding to there with the transcripts, actually finding those nuggets of gold through conversations with clients, turning that into whatever we want from the point of view, whether that becomes marketing material or at the very least generating a really comprehensive client summary. If you've got an advisor that's being transitioned in terms of this new advisor is coming on or a client is changing hands, being able to go into that Salesforce record and literally click a button and see this is all of the, this is the 10 important things that the client has spoken about in the last 12 months. Here's what you should be worried about, or here are the opportunities, versus having to trawl through file notes and listen to hours of recordings. It is a massive benefit.
Okay, so here's one for you. Everyone's picked up the phone and spoken to a major corporate, and the first thing you hear is this call is being recorded for quality and training purposes. I think, have you gone as far as recording phone calls, and giving people who are calling in a heads up to that effect, and taking transcriptions from telephone calls as well as doing those in-person meetings? Because one of the applications I think that could spring from keeping those transcripts is actually it's a training opportunity. I mean, as you say, you actually can interrogate that information and see where perhaps there's a better way things could have been said or done. Yep. But also in a quality sense, compliance officers currently have a pretty terrible task of, randomly selecting files and trawling through notes. But I imagine with your advanced thinking on this, you've already begun to think about how you could actually look for, in a compliance sense, how things are being done, because everyone's interested in doing things the right way. Doesn't mean to say people don't always make mistakes. And so can you see that being an application for the capture of those transcriptions?
100%. I think that, we use Zoom Phone, for example, and to be honest, we should switch on the recording by default. We just haven't, and that's probably more of a change management and just an exercise of everyone being comfortable with that and just making that decision as a business. I think that will actually sometimes probably have more benefit than the file note transcription, because I don't know, file notes always seem to come out as the polished version of the conversation, whereas a lot of the advice and a lot of the struggle happens on the phone in terms of having those hard conversations about, do I implement this advice, calling about markets, all that sort of thing. And I don't know, it's also just that balance of, are we going to maintain that sort of raw relationship if the call's being recorded, as you mentioned, in terms of that disclaimer at the start? So I think that's a real challenge. And so it's probably just about the catch-22, isn't it, on can we build better relationships with you in the future because we have recorded this call, or do we just have a great relationship point in time? I'm not sure.
I'll share my own perspective on that one. We've had this conversation internally just recently, and I was using the example of people. I mean, I've heard that intro on a phone call so many times, it's almost, you almost ignore it. I mean, you know that it's being recorded. They don't beep at you like an old stockbroker thing used to beep at you, tell you were being recorded still. But I think people forget very quickly and just become, natural in that conversation. I was using the example, I got a bit of a laugh. I was always staggered. I wasn't an avid watcher, but early days of the Big Brother house, when people were in there and getting video recorded on everything they were doing, I'm thinking, have they forgotten they're being recorded? Because I couldn't believe the behaviour. And I think that's true of the way we all operate. I mean, you forget the cameras are there, or you forget that you're being recorded, and you just operate naturally. And so I think that initial reluctance perhaps some people have, I just don't think people will change the way they interact with us if there's a recording of that call. But it remains to be seen. We haven't done it yet ourselves. We have Zoom phone. We're testing it ourselves, and we're looking to take those transcriptions and add them to that library of information we can use to improve quality and training.
Yeah. No, I think that is a great analogy on Big Brother there. But you're also right around, like, in terms of using those apps in-person meetings, you literally just press record on your phone, put it in the middle of the table, and you're totally right. After a couple of minutes, you forget, and the sort of stiffness goes away from going, oh, geez, I'm being recorded here. And the benefits do far outweigh the cost or the risk there. I think it is definitely something that we need to get on top of, but also I'd be really keen to catch up with yourself and Nick again to see your findings on that.
Yeah, so you've given us a bunch of stuff there. I would like to just explore this question that we've had, and I know we've spoken a little bit about this. You mentioned content snare at one point, and I'm not sure that you use content snare still or some variation of that, because capturing information for clients, making it easy for the client to give us information. Can you tell us a bit about how you think about that initial onboarding process with clients and gathering all their information? How do you manage that?
Not too well, I don't think, at the moment. So, yeah, we went down the content snare path, would have been a few months ago now. And it's because I'd been trying to essentially replicate what content snare does inside Salesforce. And so really what that is you're essentially building a tailored form for every client. You know, you can start from a template, but then you can build out additional questions. So clients can get this, tailored style checklist essentially of information that we need, and you can sort of go from there. We sort of piloted the content snare, and I did a lot of work on building that Salesforce integration. Once again, they've got an API, so I was able to do it through Ricardo. And what we found was it was just taking so much more time to actually prepare the checklist or prepare what the client needed to provided. And it wasn't overly, like, it's intuitive, but it wasn't overly intuitive where you would go, wow, this is going to change our lives. And so, to be honest, we've actually gone back to the drawing board on how we actually capture information and get information from clients. And I think it really has highlighted that we have done so much work on the backstage of our business, on the practice management side of things. So building all that architecture so that we can then focus on the front stage now. So because you can't have a great front stage experience with clients if you don't have that architecture, the frameworks in place in the back end. And so, to be quite frank with you, it's something that we're still exploring, to the point where this month I'm actually building out our, going back to the drawing board in terms of building it through flow. Because what was and this is it's crazy how things pan out, but loved content snare from the point of view it's so customizable. But because it was so customizable, that became an issue for the team because everything became unique and bespoke. And there are just times where you need that standard procedure, standard process where all clients go down this path, because it makes it really easy from a process perspective in terms of what's going to happen next, where data goes, etc. And so it's just, I'm really glad that we've explored and gone down that path. I'm disappointed that we haven't got to a stage where clients are giving their information in a really nice and easy way yet, but also excited that we're going to solve that at least in the next couple of months. But yeah, I would, I think the next stage too is actually looking at a fully fledged client portal. This is the other thing in terms of, because we do have the ability and capability. Yep. Yeah, because we do have the ability to build anything and everything, because Salesforce is that blank canvas. It's the old adage that just because you can build something on Salesforce doesn't mean you should. And it comes back to the mantra of, looking out there to say, are there best of breed tools out there that we can integrate? So it's really looking at, are there those tools out there that can actually solve those problems? Mainly probably from a fact finding perspective, particularly from an open banking style experience, instead of having to manually enter information that stays static for however many months until you see the client again, but also that information and data collection, but also sharing as well. So yeah, an ongoing challenge, Rob.
Yeah, and so as you say, just because you can build it on Salesforce or use Salesforce's tools doesn't mean you should. Early stages, from a portal standpoint, are you thinking it will be a standalone specialist piece of software that integrates with Salesforce that you will look to I mean, it might be too early to say, but are you thinking a standalone portal software that is integratable to Salesforce?
Yeah, in the past, and we still have clients on it. So My Prosperity has been something that we used before we actually bought Salesforce. And what it turned out was it was just another island of data. Like it wasn't actually, talk about sort of integrated front stage, backstage. It was really just this client area where you just have to remember to go in there. Obviously, there's a process issue there in terms of us going, this is where we use and really double down on using this for all clients, but we just didn't get to that point. But I'm really interested in exploring My Prosperity from a robust Salesforce integration perspective. If we can't get that, if we can't come to an agreement with them, if they don't have that, if we can't integrate it in a way that sort of suits us from the point of view of workflow and visibility and just getting things done more efficiently and quicker, we just won't go down that path. But that's the current avenue we're exploring. Yeah, as you mentioned, that sort of point solution, but integrated with Salesforce. Salesforce has, it comes back to the original point around Salesforce plus in terms of like they've got Experience Cloud, but that comes even more of a blank canvas than Salesforce itself. So you then got to build it yourself. You got to maintain it. I am not looking forward to the potential of having to build some sort of open banking integration. It's not something that I think we should be doing from scratch. I'm confident on the document sharing and the content side of things, but I think it will fall down when we go down that open banking path if it's not done properly. And I want to do it right the first time, especially when clients are involved. You don't want to muck them around. You don't want to muck anyone around. But if you have a choice, you don't want to muck around your clients in terms of portals and process changes and all that sort of thing.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And as you say, I mean, what you're describing, and clearly something that's coming through as a really strong theme for you, Pat, is that you're thinking about it being this, everything has to be sort of central and has to be able to come through the one system, the one operating system where everything must be. You must live inside the system. If you have to go out to different systems, it quickly falls down. And as you say, when you mentioned a data island with My Prosperity, if you can find a way to pull everything back through the one source of truth, that obviously is the key. And the thing that is your sort of core principle in everything you're looking at, is the ability to bring it back through the database and build it into our workflows.
Yeah. I think the other thing too, Rob, is that that's not the only data island that we have in an existing way. And we always forget that like product providers and platforms are actually they're part of the tech stack as well. Like they just sometimes they don't get put in the diagram or thought about. But we're starting to see, finally tools like, CFS and NetWealth where they've now got APIs. And I'm really excited about NetWealth in particular. They're our, I guess you'd say, preferred platform. We've got multiple platforms that we use, but NetWealth it works well for us and the way that we, I guess, manage clients and recommend advice to clients. But I've been able to hook up NetWealth through their API through Ocado to the point where, and obviously this podcast isn't sponsored by NetWealth, unlike the AdviceTech one, where the experience is actually nicer inside Salesforce looking at a client's NetWealth account than it is actually in the NetWealth platform itself. Plus, you've got the ability I mentioned OpenAI before, the ability to actually click a button to get a summary of what's actually happened in that account. And that's just in a reactive way. We're now at a point where all NetWealth accounts are feeding through, not just from a balance perspective. I don't know if you want to talk about bloody financial planning revenue management, but you've got all the transaction data coming through, which means you can see whether an advice fee has been paid and when it was last paid. You've got things like rollovers coming through or concessional contributions or pension payments. So I can easily use AI to ping an advisor and say, this has happened or this hasn't happened through automation. So you've got all these abilities to just really enhance your sort of platform relationship in another platform. It's also bringing through things like CGT information, insurance stuff, and just the financial holdings, like all that sort of thing. Like it just opens up a whole world of possibility. And it's just going back to the original point, it is just picking your product or your platform provider can sometimes be, as important as picking your client portal provider because you're dealing with them on a daily basis.
Yeah, wow. I have a mixture of excitement and envy talking to you, Pat, because clearly you're right at the cutting edge of what's possible and seeing, as you say, thinking platforms, they're a part of the tech stack, and bringing data directly, natively through from the platform makes a lot of sense. The platform space it's a huge part of what we do, and the investment that those firms have to put into their software and into their technology to actually be able to support businesses like ours is obviously significant. But it sounds like, as you say, whilst this podcast isn't sponsored by it, well, clearly you guys have really taken the baton and run with it there, and it's impressive to hear. Just to go sort of to that question of what's possible and what it takes to make decisions around technology that you're rolling out. You guys are, accountants and financial planners, so you're pretty good at running the numbers on growth and profitability, and some of those things clearly are going to make significant savings in time. How does the business in advance, if it does it in advance, measure the cost and benefit of the improvements your tech stack brings to the bottom line? Do you sort of get a long leash to go, just go for it, Pat, we'll figure it out, and decide if it's worth it after you've figured it out? Or do you make a calculated choice at the front end to say, well, what is it going to cost us to do this? Do we actually even test it first? Because obviously there's a cost to bringing on all these pieces of technology and adding them onto the Salesforce plus system as you described. So how do you guys approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're particularly good at it from like a science perspective, or like in terms of having a robust or rigid process on it. And I don't think, as you alluded to, we have seen a lot of the benefit yet in terms of a cost and efficiency wins. We've seen a truckload of the cost, but a lot of that benefit is still to come. And a lot of what we're doing is micro efficiencies. I think this is probably more concerning than impressive, but in the last 30 days, we've run 1.39 million pieces of automation just inside the Salesforce platform. So that's the flows that we were talking about in terms of kicking off processes, creating records, updating fields, etc. And so what I've done in the past, and I need to keep doing this, is I've got what's called automation logs, where it actually tracks when that automation is used. So I can get really granular in terms of when this process was used. If I've been able to ascertain how long that process took before, I can directly see how long it's taking now, and then you can get that direct cost of what's this team member's effective hourly rate and the time. Like, it's just a simple equation there in terms of whether we're kicking goals from a process efficiency point there. We talked about tools like Anature before. Like that's probably a rare example of massive cost saving, but also massive team member delight in the long term. But it means that, the experience is also better. So when you can save cost but also improve experience, that is an absolute no-brainer. Where it becomes really challenging is when you might have this tool that is half the cost, but you know that the team are going to have probably a experience that is not as streamlined and nice as it is now. So that's always a challenge. Mentioned as well around, like, a lot of the cost is actually indirect, and it is actually based on the change management. It's your slowing down before you ramp up and seeing the benefits of that. And a lot of that is actually where it actually takes away from my time and others' time to actually train on the new way of doing things. So then that delays other tools, etc. I think the way that we've been able to use a tool like Workado, but also Salesforce, is because a lot of those costs are fixed. Like, Workado will scale with you in terms of if you've got this base cost, right? As you mentioned, the credit card limit might have been maxed out with the initial purchase for you, Rob, if you were going to go down that path. But when you ramp up that automation, it becomes a lot cheaper based on how hectic your business is or sites are, etc. So it means that you can actually gradually consolidate systems into, say, Workado, and just actually simplify your tech stack in that way. I think from the perspective of, I gave you that sort of Stripe and Salesforce example of being able to consolidate not only two practice ignition examples, but they also take a clip on, say, the Stripe side of things. So they're making money on the transaction fees that clients are paying, or that we're in terms of that gets passed on to us, that we're paying. So you've got the point where, once again, you're saving money, but also creating a better experience. I think the reality is, though, for us as a Collins SBA, as a site that's based in Hobart with sort of 47 team members, that we were just too small to be spending that amount of money on both, enterprise CRM and a full-time head of technology / retired financial advisor. So we've been able to cross that hurdle now through essentially our second site in Newcastle through a partnership with an accounting firm. But overnight, be able to see, if we think about headcount increasing, that's how I tend to measure it, is you've got what is our actual cost per user and, what is the marginal cost of a new user coming on. If we can keep that below about $300 a month, I'm happy in terms of at this stage. And we're seeing now the scale benefits of our Salesforce licenses, for example. We've had to trigger an early renewal as this new site has come live. It means that tools like Workato, which are a big upfront cost, can be spread across the multiple sites as well. And so now we've been able to cross that hurdle through an increased headcount. And so all that money that we've spent over the last 3 or 5 years building that architecture, building that framework, has meant that we can then scale and then realize that benefit over time. But to answer your original question, I don't think we've seen a lot of the benefit yet, and it's definitely not an exact science or formula to working out what is the actual benefit. And I wish we did more on that, and I need to get better on it. And I think just in the last 3 weeks or so, I've actually started tracking my time to the minute. So using that's another integration actually, use a time tracking app called Timely, which uses AI and actually tracks your activity so you can easily log a timesheet, but also rolling that out to team members as well to say, how much freaking time are you spending on this job? So not only can we accurately charge clients, but then we can work out really clearly what processes are taking the most time, and then actually do that process that I mentioned before around, okay, before versus after, and just drive the productivity, like as simple as that. But we could do so much more, get so much better at it, Rob.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you frightened a lot of people there by saying you're tracking your time to the minute. So you've talked a lot about Workato being a massive win, Anature on document signing. If you had to pick one where you felt that there was one really big win in terms of positive impact on the business, where everyone just went, high five, Pat, you've really nailed this, and the client experience, so perhaps the clients, the team, the management team at Collins SBA all just said, wow, we've really nailed it on this one. What one would you put at the top of the list for you guys in terms of having that big win?
I think it has to be, it's probably 1.5. So I think the accounting workflow side of things, where like when we were able to present that, like in terms of the finished product, started small, tried to start with a little team and just build to essentially unravel what Creative Mass had done with the butchering of the tasks and the workflow side of things and the team members leaving. Like I had to make accounting great again hat on in the meeting. We had a literal team member in tears because of happiness, because we had just solved accounting workflow. I will never forget that in terms of the impact of everyone coming together to go like, wow, this platform can actually do what it says on the jar. So that was a good sort of winning back trust on like, yes, we're going down the right path, but also, this CRM, like literally just been rebuilding trust in the Salesforce CRM platform for the last 3 or 4 years, because people didn't know that it was Creative Mass or Wealth Connect that was butchering it. They just thought Salesforce was crap. So it's just coming back on that journey. But the main thing, it has to be the proposal side of things. Like the ability for a team member now, they can send out a proposal within a couple of minutes, and they know that a client will exactly what they're going to see. They know that means that their workflow is going to fire off. Like this is clean, rigid process, and a client has accepted that proposal in as quick as about 90 seconds. So the ability to be able to send out and take funds in terms of client time and advisor time, or whoever's preparing the proposal time, sort of less than 5 minutes is, I think, unheard of in financial planning and financial services, accounting as well. And the fact that I can, as someone who, as I mentioned, a retired financial advisor who does not know how to code, but can use Workato to the point where we can charge clients via API, I think that's pretty incredible. You can actually trigger a debit from someone's bank account or card through API, through Wacado, and that all then rolls through and reconciles in Xero, etc. Like I remember we've been using that way of doing things for about sort of 18, 19 months now. And I remember being so nervous. Like this was something that we could not muck up. Like if you're going from a tool that literally is proposal software to something that, someone has without technology experience has built and go, yeah, we're just going to replace it with this and we're going to start charging, $8 million of revenue per annum through this, wild and wacky tool that Pat's built, to see that actually work and come through and reconcile and not have as many issues as you thought. Like I was pretty proud of that, to be honest, in terms of it's quite simple on the front end, but in the back end, it's probably a bit of a spider's web and lots of Band-Aid fixes initially. But I think to be able to use Flow and Wacado to do something like that and to have clients Apple Pay proposal, workflow kickoff, all that sort of thing, I think that has to be one of the prouder moments for sure.
Yeah, that would have been massive. And I love the story where you had an accountant in tears of joy to see workflows that actually worked. And as you say, they associated the problems with Salesforce, not the actual implementation of Creative Mass in the way they tried to roll it out. So well done on that. You won back the trust after it had been severely damaged by the sound of it, to the point where you'd had a couple of staff leave thinking we can't work with this. So very, very impressive, my friend. Just as one final question then, if we can, and you may have touched on it a bit throughout the conversation, and I just, as a wrap-up question, just, you're right at the very front edge of what's possible here. You're looking at all the technology day in, day out. You're seeing what's possible to make business more efficient, client experience better. You've talked about the backstage being where you've focused your attention and your energy and done a lot of work on that, which has made the business internally a lot more efficient. And now moving more to front of stage, you've mentioned portal and the like. How do you see technology evolving within financial planning and accounting, or just in your own business? Because obviously you are a multidisciplinary business. What are the emerging trends or tools you're really excited to integrate into your system as a wrap-up question looking forward?
I think it has to be using AI in a responsible but also beneficial way. And just leveraging the data that you've got in your CRM. Like by default, I am the gatekeeper of the information and the data in our Salesforce system. So can you create this report or this dashboard, etc. But, we've been able to build through that OpenAI API integration, all these prompt templates where someone can just click a button and get all the insights they need based on what they want. I think that'll massively change the CRM landscape going forward. And I think it is critical, as you sort of talked to before around the recording of conversations. I think within the next sort of 6 to 12 months, we will see essentially hands off the keyboard in terms of you will have a conversation with the client or prospective client. You will hang up that call or hang up that meeting, and then you'll go and actually look at your CRM, and it will have actually populated all of the relevant information. So whether that's the fact find or their date of birth, like mobile numbers, like just basic stuff where people are still rekeying or keying that information manually. Like I think data entry will go from the point of view of the CRM side of things there, and CRM will become far more around like proactive insights than reactive looking for information. Like you talked about sort of platforms before and tools like MyProsperity, all that sort of thing. I know they've come a long way since we were sort of using them sort of 5 or 6 years ago fully, but you still, and this is where AI will really help, you still have to look for those insights and look for, a client got paid, or payslip's a bit different this month, or concessional contributions a bit different, etc. So a lot of that proactive stuff should be taken care of by AI, which will, as everyone sort of says, enable you to build deeper relationships with clients, etc. But it actually will. Like you will actually have the data there and the insights there. Like you've got, like industry super funds now that are starting to charge less than $1,000 a year to provide advice. So it's just so clear that what becomes more important than ever, is to just ensure that you have all your data in the right place and the tools in front of you to build and maintain client relationships and just to be proactive. Like it's that simple. And in terms of going forward as a business from like an integrations point of view, we've talked about the client portal. I think that will change things dramatically. but also working on things like a direct ATO integration. Like that'll take it to the next level at least from an accounting point of view, but that'll open up a world of opportunity for our financial planning advisors to get those warm referrals, those warm sort of introductions, because we'll have all that ATO data in the system as well. So you're not reliant on a person to find those insights on page 73 of the financial statements from last year. So I think we're going to see a lot more proactive stuff happen, and to be able to have that level of integration with something like an OpenAI, Ocado, we didn't even mention that you can just swap out tools willy-nilly. If I go into a recipe or a process and go, I want to swap out Stripe for another billing engine, I can just do that. It's probably not as simple as that. I've definitely oversimplified it, but it's possible. So I think there's that. And I think that's probably another point around technology moving forward in the landscape and all that sort of things is you will have tools where, like, you've got the rise of orchestration technology, so Ocado and Power Automate and MuleSoft and all those sort of things, where you will hopefully, it'll become a bit like the States where you can just plug and play your tools and your data and you're not beholden to, say, an X-Plan or a big CRM that's trying to do it all. It's just the plug and play is just going to continue and become easier as well, I think.
It's an exciting future to think about, Pat. You are a unique individual in that you have come from being a financial planner, and therefore you don't come from this as a technology person. You came from it from a practitioner standpoint, and then you've adapted to becoming a tech innovator. So being able to chat to you, someone who actually understands the side of the fence we sit on, and not listen to someone who's actually just got a technology hat that doesn't understand the financial planning world. Very impressive, the work you've done. Terrific to chat to you this afternoon. We could talk for a long time. I really feel like this is a conversation that could go on for 3 hours plus, but respecting your time, I know it's a bit earlier where you are than where I am, but I really am so appreciative you've taken the time to have a chat to me, Pat. It's very exciting times we are living in the space that you're operating in day to day in technology. So thanks again for taking the time joining me on the Trusted Advisor podcast.
Thanks for having me, Rob. I really appreciate it. And you had a great time chatting all things tech.
Look forward to talking to you again soon, Pat. Cheers.
Thanks for listening and learning with us. For a complete list of episodes, show notes, transcripts, and more, go to thetrustedadvisor.com.au.